What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. All right, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have quite a bit more to talk to you about today in regards to the Climate Prediction Center, as well as a lot of the conditions that we're going to be showing, as well as a few model runs that we will show you as well. But before we get into anything, I do want to say I have been kind of watching the 8.8 magnitude earthquake off of Kamchatka that caused a bit of a chaos and a tsunami across parts of the Pacific. So my heart, thoughts, and prayers go out to those who have been affected for that as of right now. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and dive right into it right here. So for those of you who have not seen this, this is what the Climate Prediction Center put out yesterday. We're briefly going to go over this again. Then we're going to be talking about ocean analysis and then some more conditions. So we'll go ahead and get started with this. So here's your global tropics hazards outlook. The Climate Prediction Center, or CPC for short, has now put a few areas of potential interest for tropical development. Tropical cyclone formation probability, at least for week 2, valid August 6th through the 12th. They are having this over the Greater Antilles, parts of the Bahamas, all around Florida, actually, and especially along the east coast of the United States, just north of Bermuda, as a matter of fact. So if you're watching from any of these areas, you're going to want to pay attention very closely. And from what I have seen, it looks like it's going to be one of those waves that's coming off of the main development region in that wave train, which we'll show you in a second. But ultimately, it's going to take its time to organize and develop until it gets towards the Bahamas and Florida in those areas. So that's what, in my opinion, makes this especially dangerous, because if a tropical wave doesn't start organizing and developing until it gets closer to land, a lot can happen at that current point. Now, granted, I'm not saying we're going to look at a really bad situation over there, but I'm just saying that the volatility of the forecast and the predictability goes down considerably, because before, if it's like developing, like you have 3 days out to prepare for this, you'll have some time to kind of gather your things, get out if you need to, move to higher ground in the case of storm surge and all of that stuff. But in this case, where this tropical wave is going to be waiting to develop until it gets to the towards land, that's going to be a bit more unexpected for a lot of people. So that's something I do want to keep in mind. And then the big kahuna is coming up for week 3 through August 13th through the 19th. Starting from there, that wave train is going to generate just a more and more moisture and allow for more tropical development to take place in parts of the main development region, potentially putting the Lesser Antilles in the line of fire. So that's something that we're going to want to watch very closely as more data and more model runs continue to come in. But Climate Prediction Center is starting to shift from more of a Pacific active situation to more of an Atlantic active situation, which, by the way, I've been keeping an eye on what's been going on in the Eastern Pacific. I know we've had quite a lot of activity that's been going on over there. It's mainly been staying out to sea, which is why I haven't talked about it as much. Otherwise, I would have talked about, similar to what we had with Hurricane Eric, where it was approaching land, I would be talking more about that, but it's mainly staying out to sea at this current point, so I'm not really too concerned about it at this current point in time, but I have been keeping a very close eye on that, as well as, like I said, the earthquake and all those things. We've been keeping an eye on it on Storms United. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and move on to the ocean analysis. And starting off, the reason I'm going back here is because of our ocean indexes right here for kind of our La Nina and El Nino kind of area, our ENSO region, actually. So the latest readings that we're getting from this right here indicates that we're very strongly in a negative neutral phase going into August, and a very strong negative neutral phase essentially means that we're not quite at La Nina just yet, but we're getting kind of close to that. We're kind of on that borderline, and regions 1 and 2, you can see it a little bit. We're at negative 0.28 degrees below average at this current point in time. It's been decreasing considerably over the last 10 days. Like, we went from about positive 0.15 to negative 0.28 in about a 10-day period. And this isn't like a situation where this is going to bounce back and go to above average. No, it's actually been falling pretty considerably, especially over the last couple of months. We were starting right here, then it went up a little bit, then it went down, then it went up again, then down. But we've seen the downtrends get more and more below average as the month of June went through, as the month of July went through, and started to rebound a little bit as you got through much of the month. But now it's starting to cool off more, and you're starting to notice those areas and those averages drop like a rock pretty much as it gets closer towards August. So that's regions 1 and 2. Regions 3 and 4, which is further out in the Pacific Ocean, you are seeing a bit of an increase right here. You definitely saw a bit of a downtrend for quite some time, actually. I apologize. Let me go ahead and zoom back in. You had a downtrend for quite some time with this over here, as we were hovering around 0.1-ish below average, and we dropped to about 0.6. We've definitely seen a bit of an increase right here, but that's still kind of below that 0.5 threshold to trigger a La Nina right there. But still, in order for that to happen, both regions need to be below negative 0.5 degrees Celsius. And at this current point in time, I don't think we're going to be reaching that during hurricane season unless something unexpected happens in that region that I haven't taken into account yet. So we'll have to pay attention to that moving forward. But now we're going to go ahead and talk about some conditions for you guys. We have some water temperatures. We have some ocean heat content. We have quite a few things. By the way, the University of Miami OHC website finally came back online with their OHC values, so we can talk to you guys about that once again. So with that being said, let's go ahead and start with the water temps. And kind of the most glaringly concerning area, at least in the short term I've been watching, is in the Atlantic Basin. And as you can see right here, you're looking at this, a lot of these warm waters, these 29 degrees Celsius waters, have gotten further and further and further to the south over the last couple of weeks or so. And we're getting to the point where we're at the rates where this is going to potentially be heading towards Hispaniola in the next couple of weeks or so. Like before, it was relatively concentrated in near the subtropics. It's been expanding further and further down to the south as it heads towards the tropics and heads towards the Greater Antilles right here. And considering that we're looking at potential development from the Climate Prediction Center and their forecast, that is a very concerning sign for me, to say the very least. And then moving over to the Gulf right here, the Gulf is also pretty concerning as well. It's not as warm as it was a few days ago, but it only has dropped down just a little bit. We're still averaging 30 degrees Celsius across much of this synoptic region right here, and we've definitely seen some warming over the last month or so as we've continued to watch and monitor the situation. That's also a pretty concerning sign, and why I'm looking at this is really anything that gets into the Gulf region after, I'd say, like mid-August is really going to explode with these water temperatures alone, because you have to consider there's not going to be much wind shear. The jets don't go far. The jet stream doesn't go far enough south for that to really happen. And by the time we get into mid-August, you don't have much dry air, and whatever dry air you do have can easily be mixed out by the outflow. Example of this was Hurricane Laura back in 2020. This is actually a pretty infamous example of this, because I remember I was watching it and they were talking about, oh, it's going to be running into some dry air. Oh, it's going to be running into some dry air. We're not sure how that's going to act, but we may not see as much weakening. Right after Laura moved off of Cuba and started rapidly intensifying, the outflow boundary absolutely exploded everywhere from the hurricane, and particularly from the northern side to much of the Gulf. What it did was it pushed out so much dry air, it pretty much changed the entire dynamic and allowed for Laura to take advantage of these new moist conditions, and allowed for it to rapidly intensify to a 150-mile-per-hour Category 4 hurricane and make landfall near Lake Charles, Louisiana. That was back 5 years ago. I know I keep talking about this, but it is an infamous example I do want to kind of emphasize with this, but we'll get more into that as we get towards other segments. But as we get into the Caribbean region over here, definitely starting to warm up as well. MDR's warming up as well. We'll pay attention to those as well, but we'll go ahead and shift over to the ocean heat content. Here is your OHC, ladies and gentlemen. So good to have this map back for you guys, and so good to finally have something to kind of present and talk to you guys about with that. So basically what we have for you right here is basically in the Atlantic Basin, you're seeing a really big increase of OHC. In fact, I want to go ahead and go back to about 2 weeks ago before this got shut down, just to show you what it was like. So 2 weeks ago, where we were at was we were kind of hovering around 50-ish OHC across much of the Atlantic Basin, and we weren't seeing as much in the Gulf. Caribbean was still pretty concentrated. MDR was not as far to the north. Right here, what are we looking at right now? Boom, more OHC everywhere. Look at this, the Caribbean over here. You're looking at more OHC values right here. You're starting to see increases in the eastern part of the Pacific right here. You're seeing increases in the Western Gulf. You're seeing increases in the Loop Current. You're absolutely seeing a ton of increases. Where before, we were at like 50 at the most. Now we're up to about 75 to 100 OHC across much of that basin. And that may not seem like that much, but that is very conducive for tropical development, very conducive for major intensification as well as those systems continue to organize and strengthen. And that is something that you need to pay attention to as well. Also, the main development region further to the north is the OHC, but the biggest OHC is concentrated on the western half of the MDR over there, and that is kind of concerning, I would say, because what that's telling me is that's more of a favorable pattern of this isn't going to develop right away, but it's going to develop closer to land. So basically, wave comes off Africa. It kind of takes its time to organize and develop, and then it starts to strengthen. And by the time it does, it would most likely be in this area of an increase right here, where a lot of areas actually crack to 100 OHC. So you're going to want to pay attention to that as well. And then you're looking at the northwestern Caribbean as well, especially with those Central American gyre systems that start to come off in the next couple of weeks or so. It'll run right into 150 plus, 175 plus OHC over there, and that coupled with weaker and weaker wind shear in that region will allow for more tropical development to take place, similar to what we saw with Adalia, similar to what we saw with Helene, similar to what we saw with a lot of other examples as well. But by and large, that is something you're going to want to pay attention to, and we'll keep you updated on that. Now shifting over to the wind shear, we're going to go ahead and go to 208 to 850 millibar shear just to kind of show you this right here. So here's what we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. So looking at the eastern coast over here, looking at that, we're going to go ahead and start to head over and start to get towards the east coast for the week of August 6th through 12th to kind of determine what the development conditions look like. You do have an increase of wind shear in the short term in this region starting around August 3rd, August 4th, but you're starting to notice the wind shear does start to move out of the region by August 5th, and then August 6th. Take a look at this. This is 7 p.m. August 6th, and with the exception of a few shear pockets, this area is pretty primed for development, at least in terms of wind shear. That is why the Climate Prediction Center, I apologize, has highlighted this area for development. And as you go into the 7th, you go into the 8th, that wind shear remains relatively low until we get to about August 9th or so. So you're going to want to pay attention to that. I know the European does have a low pressure system heading towards the Bahamas in that time as well, and there is some shear right here. Part of that is because of the winds of the thunders, of the storms, and all of that stuff. So you're going to want to keep that in mind. Part of it is possible shear, but we'll have to pay attention to that because by that point it's very far out, and we'll have to keep close tabs on that. But ultimately, what you have is a pretty favorable environment in terms of wind shear, at least at this current point, according to the Climate Prediction Centers, because by the time you get to August 6th, August 7th, August 8th, there's not really much shear to really stop any development at this current point, and we'll have to pay attention to other factors as well. Now, moving on to the MDR for the last bit of the run, yes, there is going to be an increase of shear in parts of the southern parts of the MDR, but in parts of the northern parts, which we were kind of waiting to kind of weaken and the shear to calm down, it's starting to weaken quite a bit. And as that wave train starts to get momentum and pick up speed, you're noticing more chances of tropical development, at least from the European and a few other runs happening over there. So you're going to want to pay attention to that. In other regions as well, the Caribbean definitely fluctuates. Look at this. This is August 6th as well. August 6th, there's no wind shear in the Caribbean, barely any in the MDR, barely any in the Gulf, barely in the Atlantic Basin. This is a pattern that concerns me quite a bit because if the Climate Prediction Center is forecasting this tropical development potential in that region, they are definitely looking at these runs, and they're definitely looking at these models, and they're going, these are favorable conditions for less shear and favorable conditions for tropical development because of that less shear and likely because of more moist air in the region. We can go ahead and show you that as well. So here's your moisture component to all of this. As we get to August 6th over here in parts of the East Coast right here, you do have some dry air in that region, but you do have some more moisture trying to mix it out right there. So overall, it's kind of a mixed bag around August 7th, August 8th. But around August 9th, you're noticing this tropical wave and this moisture plume moving into the region right here. And yes, there is still some dry air in that area, but ultimately that's not as big of a concern as it would be previously, because this dry air can get mixed out. This dry air isn't going to be as powerful as we've seen like June, early July, before some of the Sahara dust started heading towards Europe. It's not going to be as strong, and that can be more mixed out, and that is a concern that I've had for quite some time in that region. It's pretty much a mixed bag over here, so you're going to want to pay attention to that. But still, the CPC is highlighting this as an area of interest, so if you're along the East Coast, you're going to want to pay attention. Now, if you're in the MDR, this is also something to pay attention to, because now you have a pretty big moisture pocket. You have a lot of dry air that's starting to move towards Europe. It's getting squeezed into Europe. You're noticing a lot more of it actually is getting pushed over there, staying in North Africa, staying in that region. You're noticing those winds heading into Western Europe as well. You do have some Sahara dust, but that is receding pretty quickly in these model runs. And yes, there is still a little bit of dry air to the north, but that dry air is getting pushed further and further and further and further up to the north, and that is something that you're going to want to pay attention to. Now, in terms of tropical development, I've been looking at the runs. They have been kind of scattered. They have been kind of all over the place. I know we had that one scenario, and I can go ahead and show you this on satellites. We had that one scenario where this wave over here currently in the part of the MDR, in the central MDR, was going to be the one that starts it all. Doesn't look like it's going to be that as a factor, but likely the wave behind that, from what my tropical team and I have gathered. And you're starting to notice right here, this is a pretty healthy tropical wave, number one. Number two, it's considerably farther up to the north than it was previously. So that means that maybe the Cabo Verde Islands get impacted by this. So if you're tuning in from there, you're going to want to pay attention to that. But ultimately, that's going to be allowing for more moisture to move into this region right here and close to the subtropics, and allow for more tropical development potential to happen. You're going to notice this wave train continues through August, through September, through much of October. November's a bit of a stretch, but ultimately, what you see with this is you're noticing how the tropics are starting to roar awake. The tropics are waking up, and you're noticing, at least according to some models, more and more of these chances for tropical development. Matter of fact, let's go ahead and show you the European. European's been pretty interesting with this. It has been kind of bullish with tropical development. This is the 0Z as of right here. 0Z did have some tropical development happening in parts of the MDR, but it's kind of mainly remained an open wave for the short term. But more of the long term, you're looking at more of these waves coming off. Looking at this, you're looking at this low pressure system moving into the MDR about 7 days from now. Does actually close itself off, but it does kind of remain disorganized until it gets towards the Bahamas right here. So that's something you're going to want to pay attention to as well. So that's kind of your possibility right here. You have another low pressure system that's being tagged right here. And I know I've looked at the ensembles. There are definitely some signals on this as well to pay attention to, but ultimately that's your situation that you have. So if you're tuning in from these regions right here, in fact, this is actually the wave I believe the Climate Prediction Center is looking at for tropical development, why they're highlighting this region right here in the Atlantic for tropical development because of that. So that's also another interesting tidbit I did want to go ahead and share with you guys. But by and large, what you're noticing is the tropics waking up, the Europeans picking up on more signals, their ensembles are picking up on more signals. The AI run has kind of been up and down a little bit, but they're starting to pick up on more signals as well. The GFS is trying to figure this whole thing out. The CMC is trying to figure this whole thing out. The Icon's picking up more signals, and we have a lot more that we'll continue to share with you tomorrow, but we'll keep you updated on all of these things here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and close the video out right here. I really hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you are new. The goal, as always, is to get more people engaged with weather. If you would like to help us out, hang out, or ask us some questions, be sure to join the Storms United Discord server. We've been talking about quite a lot in there, with whether it's the earthquake, these tropical waves, the Eastern Pacific. The link to that will be in the end screen. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.